"I wish I could get pregnant this Christmas," she said quietly, thinking no one was listening. It was just a moment of venting between friends at the end of the workday, but her cold, mysterious millionaire boss heard every word. And what he did next changed her life forever. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The scent of lavender always calmed her. It was as if the aroma could erase, if only for a few minutes, the constant feeling of not belonging anywhere. Isabella ran a damp cloth over the mahogany table in the executive boardroom, moving with the silent precision of someone who had learned to be invisible from a very young age. At 28, she had mastered the art of cleaning without making a sound, of existing without bothering anyone, of dreaming without making a fuss. It was Christmas Eve 2023, and the offices of Calder and Associates were nearly empty. Only the ironed cleaning staff remained in that tower of glass and steel that rose in the center of Chicago like a monument to power and influence. Isabella liked these moments. When the lawyers left with their expensive suits and their important conversations, she could pretend for a few hours that this place was hers too. Dolores, her co-worker, sighed loudly as she arranged the chairs around the table. She was a middle-aged woman, a mother of 3, who always had a funny story to tell or a piece of advice to give. Isabella admired her. Dolores had that rare thing Isabella could never fully understand, a family waiting for her at home. "Who are you spending Christmas with this year, Bella?" Dolores asked, using the affectionate nickname that only she dared to use. Isabella paused her cleaning. It was a simple question, but one that always made her uncomfortable. How could she explain that she had no one? How could she say that she would spend another Christmas alone, watching romantic movies and eating frozen pizza? "Just by myself," she answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I prefer it that way, it's quieter." It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie she had been repeating for so long that she almost believed it. Dolores stopped what she was doing and looked at her with that maternal expression that always disarmed Isabella. "Honey, you're young, pretty, a hard worker. Why don't you find yourself a boyfriend, someone to call your own?" Isabella let out a soft laugh, but there was a sadness in the sound. "A boyfriend for what, Dolores? To disappoint me, to leave when he finds out I have no family, nothing to offer." "Everyone has something to offer, my dear." "They do?" Isabella went back to wiping the table, her movements quicker now as if she could wipe away the conversation along with the dust. "Then tell me what I have. I've been an orphan since I was 7. I've spent my whole life in homes that weren't mine, with people who didn't want me. I don't have my own place, no college degree, nothing a man would find interesting." Dolores walked over to her and took her hand, stopping the frantic cleaning motion. "You have a good heart, and that's rarer than you think." Isabella felt her eyes well up, but she forced a smile. It was always like this. When someone was too kind to her, when someone showed a little bit of affection, she fell apart inside. It was as if all the love she had never received came to the surface all at once. "You know what I really want," she whispered, barely realizing she was speaking. "I wish I could get pregnant this Christmas." The words slipped out before she could filter them. Dolores's eyes widened in surprise. "Pregnant? But Bella, you don't even have a boyfriend." "I know." Isabella lowered her head, feeling her face burn with shame. "It's a silly idea, but I've always dreamed of being a mother. Having someone who was truly mine, you know, someone who would look at me like I was the most important person in the world, someone I could sing to in the middle of the night, someone I could truly exist for." Dolores smiled tenderly. "Oh, my dear, that's a beautiful dream. And one day it will come true, you'll see. When you find the right man, it doesn't have to be about love, Dolores." Isabella spoke even more softly, as if confessing a sin. "I just wanted to leave a trace of myself in the world, someone who would call me home." What neither of them knew was that Vincent Calder had been standing in the hallway for several minutes, hidden in the shadows, listening to every word of their conversation. He had come to the office because he couldn't sleep, another of the many sleepless nights that had become routine since his life had turned into a sequence of empty commitments and superficial relationships. Vincent had a habit of walking the office corridors in the dead of night. It was his way of dealing with the restlessness, with the emptiness that seemed to grow inside him with each passing day. Preferring those silent hallways to the comfort of his penthouse said a lot about the state of his soul. At 42, Vincent Calder was the heir to one of the most influential legal dynasties in the Midwest. His grandfather had founded the firm back in the 1950s, and since then the family had built an empire based on multi-million-dollar contracts and political connections. Vincent had taken over as president of the company at 35, when his father suffered a heart attack. Since then, his life had been a blur of endless meetings, business dinners, and the constant pressure of maintaining the family legacy. But on that early morning, hidden in the hallway, he found himself completely paralyzed by the simple words of an employee he barely noticed. There was something in Isabella's voice, a raw vulnerability, an honesty he hadn't heard in years, that hit him like a punch to the gut. "I wish I could get pregnant this Christmas." Those words echoed in Vincent's mind in a way he couldn't explain. There was something profoundly human in that desire, something that reminded him of feelings he had buried long ago. When was the last time he'd felt the urge to create something real? When was the last time he'd thought about leaving a legacy that was more than just contracts and money? His own childhood had been a succession of disappointments. His father, an authoritarian and cold man, saw his son as nothing more than an extension of his own ambitions. His mother, a fragile woman who one day simply decided to start over alone in Italy, abandoning her husband and 8-year-old son. Vincent grew up believing that love was an empty word, that people always left when they found something better. This became even clearer during his marriage to Camille, a French violinist he met during a business trip to Paris. They married in a luxurious but cold ceremony. The relationship worked well on the surface. She was beautiful, intelligent, and fit perfectly into the social world he inhabited. But when Camille got pregnant, when they should have been closer, everything fell apart. She miscarried in the 5th month of her pregnancy, and with the loss came the truth. She had never really loved him. She had been in love with a conductor from the Paris Conservatory since before their wedding. The pregnancy had been an accident that she hoped might save a marriage that was already dead on arrival. From that day on, Vincent built even higher walls around his heart. He began to see the world through a steel lens. Everything was a contract, everything was a negotiation, nothing was trustworthy. But now, listening to Isabella, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a genuine curiosity, a desire to know more about this woman who spoke of impossible dreams with the simplicity of a child. When the cleaners finished their work and left, Vincent stood in the hallway for another hour thinking. Isabella was different from all the women he knew. She didn't want money, she didn't want status. She wanted nothing more than something so basic and yet so profound, to be a mother. And him, what did he want? For the first time in years, Vincent asked himself that question and couldn't answer immediately. The next day, he arrived at the office early. He asked the HR manager about Isabella Smith. Yes, that was her full name. He learned that she had been with the company for 3 years, was always punctual, never missed a day, never caused any trouble. She had no family, lived alone in a small apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood. She was an orphan, raised in foster homes until she turned 18. All morning, Vincent tried to focus on the contracts he needed to review, but his thoughts kept returning to her. What kind of person carried all that loneliness and still managed to dream? How could someone who had nothing hold on to so much hope? Around noon, he made a decision. He asked his secretary to find Isabella. She was on the floor below, cleaning the second-floor restrooms. When the secretary called for her, Isabella got nervous. In 3 years of working there, she had never been summoned to speak with any of the bosses. She went up to the top floor with her hands trembling and her head full of worst-case scenarios. Had she done something wrong? Had someone complained about her work? Was she going to be fired just days before Christmas? When she knocked on the president's door, she heard a deep voice tell her to come in. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and found herself in a huge office with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and an incredible view of the city. Vincent was standing with his back to her, looking out the window. "You sent for me, sir," she asked in the quietest voice she could manage. Vincent turned around. It was the first time Isabella had seen him up close. He was tall, with dark hair that had a few silver strands at the temples, and eyes of such a light blue they were almost unsettling. He wore a dark suit and a navy blue tie. There was something about him that was intimidating, yet attractive at the same time. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, not with the disdain she was used to, but with genuine curiosity. "Isabella, isn't it?" he asked, and she was surprised he knew her name. "Yes, sir." "Please, have a seat." She sat on the very edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap, her body tense. Vincent moved back behind his desk but didn't sit down. He leaned against the edge, in a more casual posture than she had expected. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir." "Do you like the work?" "Very much, sir. It's a very good company." Vincent studied her for a few seconds. Isabella was petite, probably around 5'3", slim but not fragile. She had brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, large dark eyes, and a delicate mouth. She wore no makeup, but had the kind of natural, understated beauty that needed no embellishment. There was something about her that reminded him of a wildflower, beautiful, but accustomed to growing in difficult terrain. "I need someone trustworthy for some extra work," he said finally. "My housekeeper is going away for the holiday break, and I'll need someone to take care of cleaning my apartment. It would be a temporary job, well paid. Would you be interested?" Isabella was taken aback. Why was he offering this job specifically to her? "Yes, sir, of course I'm interested." "Excellent. Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, I can." Vincent picked up a business card from his desk and wrote an address on the back. "This is the address. Penthouse apartment. Can you be there at 9 in the morning?" "Of course, sir." As she stood up to leave, Vincent spoke one more time. "Isabella." She stopped and looked at him. "Thank you for accepting, and have a good day." There was something different in the way he said it. It wasn't the automatic courtesy bosses usually have with employees. It sounded genuine. That night, alone in her small apartment, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Why had Vincent Calder, the president of the company, the most powerful man she knew, chosen her specifically for this job? And why had he been so kind? She didn't know that on the other side of the city, in the luxurious penthouse that would be her workplace starting the next day. Vincent was also awake, looking down at the city lights and thinking about the woman who had spoken of her deepest desire, unaware that she was being overheard. For the first time in years, he felt something like anticipation, something like curiosity about what the future might bring. The next day, when Isabella rang the doorbell of the penthouse, she had no idea she was about to step into a story that would change her life forever. And when Vincent opened the door, he didn't know that he was about to discover that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in simplicity. Vincent's apartment was exactly what Isabella imagined a rich man's home would be, and at the same time nothing like she expected. When he opened the door that first morning, she found herself facing an immense space, with soaring ceilings and gigantic floor-to-ceiling windows. But there was a coldness to it that surprised her. Raw concrete walls, modern furniture in shades of grey and black, not a single warm colour anywhere. It was beautiful, but empty. Like a museum where no one actually lived. "Come in," Vincent said, and his voice echoed in the vast room. He was dressed more casually than at the office. Black slacks and a white button-down shirt with, no tie. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked younger this way, less intimidating. Isabella entered slowly, her canvas sneakers making a soft sound on the polished concrete floor. She carried a bag with her cleaning supplies. She always preferred to use her own materials when possible. It gave her a sense of control. "It's very beautiful," she said sincerely, but there was an unasked question in her voice. "But cold," Vincent finished, as if reading her mind. "I know. The decorator called it conceptual minimalism. I told her it was fine." There was something in the way he said it that suggested maybe it wasn't so fine. Isabella followed him on a quick tour of the apartment. 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a huge kitchen that looked like it was never used, a living room with enormous sofas and a television that took up half a wall. And books. So many books. The shelves covered an entire wall of the living room from floor to ceiling. "You read a lot," she observed, stopping in front of the bookshelf. "It's my vice," Vincent admitted. "When I can't sleep, I read, which ends up being most nights." Isabella ran her fingers over the spines of the books. There was everything: literary classics, law books, biographies, even some romance novels. She stopped at a volume of Jane Austen's novels, the cover worn from use. "Pride and Prejudice was the first book that ever made me cry," she commented without thinking. "You've read Austen?" Vincent asked, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. Isabella blushed. She always felt diminished when she showed some knowledge that people didn't expect from her. "I like to read. I borrow books from the neighborhood library. It helps to pass the time. It helps you not feel so alone," Vincent said quietly, and she looked at him, surprised. That was exactly it, but she had never put it in those terms. "Yes," she admitted. "That's it." They stood for a few seconds in silence, looking at the bookshelf, and Isabella had the strange feeling that she had just shared something important with him. "Well," Vincent said, returning to a more formal tone, "I'll let you get to work. I'll be in my office there." He pointed to a door at the end of the hall. "If you need anything, just let me know." Isabella spent the rest of the morning cleaning, but it was different from cleaning at the office. Here she could imagine what it would be like to live in a place like this. She spent more time than necessary arranging the sofa cushions, organizing the books alphabetically, adjusting the pictures on the walls. There were few personal decorations, a few old photos on a side shelf, a black grand piano against the window, clearly untouched for a long time. Around noon, Vincent came out of his office. "Have you had lunch?" he asked. "I brought a snack," Isabella replied, pointing to the bag where she had packed a simple sandwich. "There's food in the fridge. Help yourself." "No need, sir, thank you." Vincent watched her for a moment. "Isabella." "Yes?" "You don't have to call me sir all the time." "Vincent is fine." She nodded, but she knew it would be hard to get used to. The class difference between them was something she felt physically, as if there were an invisible line she shouldn't cross. In the following days, a quiet routine was established between them. Isabella would arrive at 9, clean the apartment with the care of someone being paid to do an excellent job, but also with the delicacy of someone who understood this was someone's home. Vincent would work in his office, but he would come out from time to time for coffee or simply to walk around the living room. On the third day, she noticed he had left a book on the living room table, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. On the fourth morning, there was a single white rose in a small vase next to the bookshelf. On the fifth day, a note stuck to the fridge. "There's iced tea inside. The heat is unbearable." They were small, almost imperceptible gestures, but Isabella noticed every one. There was something touching in the discreet way Vincent tried to take care of her, without making it seem like he was doing so. One afternoon, while cleaning his office, Isabella found a forgotten photo on the desk. It was Vincent, a few years younger, next to an elegant blonde woman at a lavish wedding. They were smiling for the camera, but even in the picture, you could tell there was something forced about those smiles. "That was my ex-wife," Vincent's voice said from behind her. Isabella jumped, nearly dropping the photo. "I'm sorry, I wasn't snooping. I was just cleaning, and it's all right. It's no secret." He took the photo from her hands and looked at it for a few seconds. "Camille. We were incompatible." There was a sadness in his voice that made Isabella completely forget the social distance that separated them. "That must have been difficult," she said softly. "She was pregnant when we broke up," Vincent continued, as if the words were coming out against his will. "She lost the baby. Later I found out she never really wanted to have a child with me. She was in love with another man since before we were married." Isabella's heart ached. There was a deep pain in his voice, a wound that clearly hadn't fully healed. "I'm so sorry," she said, and she truly was. "Since then, I don't trust people very much, especially when it comes to family. He placed the photo back on the desk, face down, and left the room. Isabella stood there for a few minutes, processing what she had just heard. Suddenly, the coldness of that apartment made much more sense. It wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a shield. The following week, the routine between them shifted subtly. Vincent began to talk more, asking small questions about her life, commenting on the books he was reading. Isabella, in turn, began to do things that weren't in her job description, making tea for him when she noticed he was stressed, leaving fresh flowers in different rooms, organizing the papers on his desk more efficiently. It was like a careful dance between two lonely people who were learning to trust one another. One evening, Isabella was finishing cleaning the kitchen when she noticed it had started to rain heavily outside. As she was putting away her cleaning supplies, Vincent appeared at the kitchen door. "It's raining hard," he said. "It's not safe for you to go home now." "I'll be fine. Don't worry." "Isabella." He said her name in a way that made her stop and look at him. "Stay. There are plenty of guest rooms here. You can leave in the morning." There was something in his voice that wasn't exactly a request, but it wasn't an order either. It was almost a plea. Isabella looked out the window. The rain was indeed torrential, and she would have to take 2 buses to get home. But it wasn't just that. There was something about the idea of staying there in that big, quiet apartment that appealed to her. When was the last time she hadn't spent a night completely alone? "All right," she said. "If it's no trouble." "It's not," Vincent replied too quickly. He showed her to the guest room, a space nearly as large as her entire apartment, with a king-size bed, a huge walk-in closet, and a private bathroom. There were clean towels, bath products, even a new nightgown still with its tag on in one of the drawers. "My former housekeeper always kept this room ready for guests," Vincent explained, noticing her surprise. "You can use anything you need." That night, Isabella took the longest bath of her life. The tub in the guest room was enormous, and there were aromatic salts and oils she didn't even know existed. When she finally got out of the bath and put on the nightgown, a delicate silk piece that probably cost more than she earned in a month, she felt like a completely different person. She was leaving the room when she heard music coming from the living room. Piano. Someone was playing the piano. She followed the sound and found Vincent sitting at the black grand piano she always saw by the window. He was playing a melancholic melody, his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. Isabella hid in the hallway, watching. There was something devastatingly beautiful about the scene. A man alone, playing the piano on a rainy night, in a huge, empty room. When the music ended, she moved away silently, but Vincent saw her. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't." He stood up from the piano. "Do you like music?" "I do, but I don't know anything about it. I never had the chance to learn. That Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, my mother used to play it." There was a melancholy in his voice that made Isabella move closer. "Does she still play?" "I don't know. She left when I was 8, decided to start her life over alone in Italy. We never had contact again." The words came out simply, factually, but Isabella could hear the pain behind them. Suddenly she understood a lot about Vincent. The coldness, the distrust, the way he protected himself from anything that could hurt him. "That must have been so hard," she said. "My father always said she was unstable, that it was better she left before causing me more trauma." Vincent sat back down at the piano, but didn't play. He just ran his fingers over the keys. "But I missed her. For a long time I thought it was my fault." Isabella sat down next to him on the piano bench. It wasn't a calculated move. It was an impulse, the same impulse that made her care for injured birds when she was a child. "It wasn't your fault," she said. With absolute certainty in her voice. Children are never to blame when adults leave. Vincent looked at her, and for the first time since they met, she saw real vulnerability in his eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I was abandoned too, several times. And I learned that when someone leaves, it's always about them, never about us." They sat side by side in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain patter against the window. There was something deeply intimate about that moment. Two adult orphans, sharing their wounds on a stormy night. "Isabella," Vincent said, his voice lower than usual. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "At the office the other night, you said you wished you could get pregnant this Christmas. Was that true?" Isabella felt her blood run cold. How did he know that? She had only told Dolores, and they were alone in the boardroom. Vincent noticed her shock and quickly explained, "I was in the hallway. I couldn't sleep and went for a walk through the office. I heard you talking. I didn't mean to listen, but you heard me." Isabella stood up from the bench, mortified. "You heard everything." "Yes, and that's why I offered you this job." She stood there processing the information. Vincent had overheard her most intimate, most shameful desire, and then had... what? Felt sorry for her. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Why did you bring me here?" Vincent stood up too and faced her. There was something different in the way he looked at her now, more intense, more direct. "Because," he said, "I want something too, something I thought would never be possible." "What?" "An heir, someone to carry on the family name. My parents, before they died, always demanded that of me, and I always thought it would be impossible after what happened with Camille." Isabella didn't understand where he was going with this. "But I don't see what that has to do with me." Vincent took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "It has everything to do with it, because I have a proposal for you, something that can give us both what we want." And then he said the words that would change everything. "I want you to have my child." The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to have its own substance. Isabella stared at him, trying to process what she had just heard. "What do you mean?" "An arrangement. No romance, no emotional complications. You want a child. I need an heir. We can help each other." Isabella felt her legs go weak. She had to lean on the piano to keep from falling. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I would take care of everything. Doctors, hospital, all expenses. And after the child was born, you would both be financially secure for life. You would be a wealthy mother. You would have everything you ever wanted. And what would you get out of it? The heir my family expects, and the peace of mind of knowing I'm not getting emotionally involved with anyone. It would be a clean, clear, risk-free arrangement." Isabella looked him in the eyes, trying to understand if this was real or if she was dreaming. "And after the child was born, then you would be free to live your life as you pleased, with complete financial security." "And you? Would you be the father?" "On paper, yes. I would ensure the child had everything they needed, but without emotional complications." Isabella felt a mix of shock, anger, and something she couldn't quite identify. Was it excitement, hope, fear? "Are you offering me money to be a surrogate?" "I'm offering you a chance to fulfill your dream and have financial security, and I'm asking you to help me fulfill a family obligation." There was something in the way he said it that sounded cold, calculated, but there was also something in his eyes that said it wasn't that simple. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But even as he said it, they both knew she was already seriously considering the proposal, and they both knew that nothing would be as simple as Vincent was trying to make it seem, because when two lonely people decide to create a life together, even if it's just an agreement, something always changes, something always gets complicated, and something always becomes too real to be controlled. Isabella spent 3 days without returning to Vincent's apartment. 3 days locked in her small apartment in Pilsen, staring at the peeling walls and trying to understand if the proposal he had made was real or if she had imagined it all. The proposal echoed, in her mind in different ways with each passing hour. In the morning, when she woke up alone in the narrow bed that took up most of her room, it seemed absurd. Who was she to think she could have a child with a man like Vincent Calder? But at night, when the silence of the apartment became deafening and she found herself imagining what it would be like to rock a child in her arms, The proposal began to make sense. He had been clear about the terms. It wouldn't be about love or a relationship. It would be an agreement between two people who wanted specific things and could help each other. She would have the child she had always dreamed of. He would have the heir his family demanded. Simple, clean, uncomplicated. But was it really simple? Isabella remembered the way Vincent had looked at her that night when he made the proposal. There was something in his eyes that wasn't just cold business calculation. There was need, loneliness. She couldn't define it, but there was something there that suggested that for him too, it wouldn't be as simple as he wanted to make it seem. On the morning of the fourth day she made her decision. She called his office and asked to speak with him. The secretary said he was in an important meeting, but when Isabella said it was about the extra work at his apartment, she was transferred immediately. "Isabella?" His voice sounded tense, anxious. "Hi. I'd like to talk to you about the proposal." There was a pause. "Of course. Can you come here now?" "I can." "I'll be waiting." When Isabella arrived at the apartment, Vincent was waiting for her in the living room, clearly nervous. He was pacing back and forth, his hands in his pockets. When she entered, he stopped pacing. "So?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but she could hear the tension in his voice. "I accept," Isabella said, without beating around the bush. "But I have some conditions." Vincent nodded as if he had been expecting it. "Name them." "I want to be involved in all decisions about the pregnancy, doctors, tests, everything. I don't want to be treated like an object." "Agreed." "I want free access to the child after they're born. I won't accept being just an egg donor." "Agreed." "And I want a written contract, with all the clauses clearly defined." Vincent smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Of course. My lawyer will draw it all up." They looked at each other for a few seconds, and suddenly the reality of what they had just agreed to seemed to weigh in the air between them. "So this is it?" Isabella asked. "Officially." "This is it," Vincent confirmed, and then, as if he had thought of something important, he added, "Isabella, I want you to know that I will take good care of you during this process. You'll have the best of everything, and afterward you and the child, you will be safe forever." There was something in the way he said it that reassured her, as if, despite the practical side of the agreement, he genuinely cared about her well-being. In the following days, Vincent kept his word. He hired the best obstetrician in Chicago, had blood tests done on both of them to confirm they were healthy, and presented Isabella with a detailed contract that guaranteed her and the child's financial security for life. But it was also during this time that she began to notice the first sign of something that worried her. Vincent became attentive, overly attentive. He started calling her several times a day, asking if she was all right. He had food from the city's best restaurant sent to her apartment. He would show up unannounced to see if she needed anything. When she told him everything was fine and she didn't need so much attention, he was visibly annoyed. "I'm just making sure you're okay," he said. "After all, now you're important to me." The way he stumbled over his words made her realize that perhaps, for Vincent, this was already becoming more complicated than he had planned. The first night they slept together happened 2 weeks after they made the deal. It had been scheduled as if it were a doctor's appointment. They had calculated her most fertile days, and the doctor had confirmed that this would be the best window of opportunity. Isabella was more nervous than she had ever been in her life. At 28, she had never been with a man. She had spent her entire life so focused on surviving, on keeping herself safe, that she had never allowed herself to explore intimacy with anyone. When she arrived at the apartment that night, Vincent had prepared everything. Candles lit in the living room, soft music playing, a bottle of wine on the table. He had tried to create a romantic atmosphere, even though they had both agreed this wasn't about romance. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, gesturing to the candles. "I know, but I wanted you to feel comfortable." They ate dinner almost in silence, both clearly nervous. Isabella barely touched her food, and Vincent drank more wine than usual. When they finally went up to the bedroom, there was a tension in the air that neither of them knew how to handle. "Isabella," Vincent said, stopping at the bedroom door, "if you've changed your mind, if you don't want to do this anymore—" "I haven't changed my mind," she said, her voice firmer than she actually felt. "It's just that it's my first time." Vincent looked at her in surprise. "Your first time?" She nodded, feeling her face burn with shame. "Are you sure you want it to be like this way?" There was something in his voice that wasn't just about the agreement. It was almost as if he wanted her to say no, that she wanted it to be different, more real. "I'm sure," she said. What happened next was different from what either of them had expected. Vincent was infinitely gentle, patient, careful. His hands trembled when he touched her face for the first time. He kissed her as if she were made of crystal, as if she might break at any moment. For Isabella, it was a revelation. She had imagined it would be something quick, mechanical, necessary only to achieve their goal. But the way Vincent touched her, looked into her eyes, whispered her name against her skin, there was nothing mechanical about it. And when they finally came together, when she felt the initial pain give way to something completely different, something warm and overwhelming, Isabella understood that she had been completely wrong about what that night would mean. Because it wasn't just an agreement that was consummated in that bed. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned, something that would be much more complicated to control. Afterward, they lay side by side in the dark, not touching, but not moving away either. Isabella could hear Vincent's breathing, still uneven, and knew he was awake. "That was different than I expected," she said finally. "How so?" "I don't know. I thought it would be more cold." Vincent turned to look at her in the dim light. "Do you regret it?" "No." "Do you?" "No," he said. But there was something in his voice that suggested he was fighting against feelings he hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks later, the test was positive. Isabella looked at the 2 pink lines on the drugstore test and felt a mix of euphoria and terror. She was pregnant. She was going to be a mother. Her most impossible dream was coming true. When she called Vincent to tell him, he was silent for so long that she thought the call had dropped. "Vincent, are you there?" "I'm here. That's incredible. It's real." There was something in his voice she couldn't identify. Relief, fear, excitement. "Can you come over?" he asked. I want to celebrate with you." When Isabella arrived at the apartment, she found Vincent in a state of excitement she had never seen. He had bought flowers, non-alcoholic champagne for her, and had a smile on his face that made her realize how handsome he was when he was truly happy. "We did it," he said, and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the living room. "We really did it." But it was also at that moment that Isabella noticed the first real change in his behavior. Vincent became possessive, not in an aggressive way, but in a way she began to find suffocating. He insisted that she stop working immediately. He hired a nutritionist to monitor her every meal. He started showing up at her doctor's appointments before she did, to make sure everything was being done correctly. "Vincent," she said one morning when he showed up at her apartment with a list of foods she should avoid, "you're overdoing it." "What do you mean, overdoing it? It's our child." The way he said "our child" made her uncomfortable. It didn't seem to include her as the mother. It felt more like she was an employee taking care of something that belonged to him. "It's my body," she said, "and I know how to take care of myself." "Of course you do, but now you have bigger responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" "To the baby, to the Calder family." It was the first time he had mentioned his family that way, as if Isabella now had some obligation to people she didn't even know. "Vincent, our agreement was clear that—" "I know what was in the agreement," he interrupted. "But things have changed. Now that you're actually pregnant, now that this is real—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella understood what he meant. To him, now that she was carrying a Calder, he had rights over her that didn't exist before. "I want you to move into the apartment," he said suddenly, What? It'll be better. I can take better care of you, make sure you have everything you need. Vincent, that wasn't in the agreement. The agreement was made before we knew if it would work. Now that it has, we need to adjust things. There was something in the way he spoke that scared her, as if the agreement was just a formality that could be changed whenever he saw fit. I don't want to move in, she said firmly. Why? Because I need my space, because we're not a couple, because this is an agreement, remember? Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that unsettled her, something that looked like resentment. Fine, he said finally, if that's how you want it. But Isabella realized that for him it wasn't fine, and she also realized that perhaps it wouldn't be so easy to keep things simple as they had planned, because Vincent was starting to act as if she belonged to him, and she was starting to realize that maybe, for him, this had never really been just an agreement. The way he looked at her now was different, more intense, more proprietary, and when he placed his hand on her still flat stomach, Isabella had the strange feeling that he wasn't just touching the baby, he was marking his territory, and that scared her. Because part of her, a part she didn't want to admit, liked the attention. She liked feeling important to someone, even if it was just because she was carrying his child. But another part of her, the part that had survived years of abandonment and disappointment, was beginning to wonder what exactly she had gotten herself into. What if Vincent decided the agreement wasn't enough? What if he wanted more? And what if she discovered that she had traded her freedom for a dream that, in the end, wasn't quite what she had imagined? These questions began to haunt her during the lonely nights in her apartment, as she placed a hand on her belly and tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing. But the more time passed, the more she realized that when it comes to creating a life with someone, there's no such thing as just an agreement. There is always something more, and that something more was starting to complicate everything in ways neither of them had foreseen. The first sign that something was wrong came on a hot afternoon in February, when Isabella was 4 months pregnant. She went downstairs to get the mail in the lobby of her building and found a letter with no return address addressed to her. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant, but the words were like a slap in the face. You're just another womb. He'll get tired of you just like he got tired of the others. Isabella reread the letter 3 times before she could fully process what it said. What others? Vincent had never mentioned any other women besides his ex-wife, and who the hell knew about their arrangement? She went back to her apartment with her hands shaking and called Vincent immediately. I received a letter, she said without preamble. What kind of letter? A threat. Someone knows about us, about the baby. There was a long silence on the line. Read it to me, he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded more resigned than surprised. When she finished reading, Vincent sighed deeply. I'm coming over, he said. Don't leave the apartment. Vincent, who would do something like this? Who else knows about our agreement? I'm coming over, he repeated and hung up. Vincent arrived at her apartment half an hour later, more tense than she had ever seen him. He took the letter, read it again, and put it in his pocket. Who was it? Isabella asked. I don't know, he said, but she could tell he was lying. Vincent. He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, she saw real fear in his eyes. It could be anyone. My family has a lot of enemies, people who would gain something from seeing me in trouble. But the letter talks about others. What others, Vincent? He looked away. It's not important. It's important to me. I'm pregnant with your child and I'm receiving threats. I have a right to know. Vincent sat on her small living room sofa, his face in his hands. When he looked at her again, he seemed to have aged 10 years. There were other women, he admitted. After the divorce, casual, relationships, nothing serious. And some of them. Some of them expected more than I was willing to give. Some thought that money meant I was emotionally available. Isabella felt a knot in her stomach. And you let them think that? I was always clear about my intentions. Like you were clear with me? Vincent looked at her, and she saw that the question hit him where it hurt. With you, it's different, he said quietly. Why? Because with you. Because you never wanted anything more than what we agreed on. You never tried to manipulate or blackmail me. What kind of blackmail? Vincent hesitated. One of them said she was pregnant. She wasn't. Another threatened to tell lies to the press about me, about the firm. Isabella began to understand. To the people in Vincent's world, she must look exactly like those other women. An opportunist trying to take advantage of him. And you think it was one of those women who sent the letter? I don't know. Maybe. But there was something in the way he said it that made her suspect there was more to it. The following week, things got worse. The brakes on Isabella's car failed as she was driving down LaSalle Street. Luckily, she was going slowly and managed to pull over to the curb before anything serious happened. But when the mechanic examined the vehicle, he said someone had deliberately tampered with the brakes. Someone wants to hurt you, the mechanic, a middle-aged man with a worried expression, said. This was no accident. Isabella called Vincent, crying. Someone tried to kill me, she said, her voice choked with tears. Vincent, I'm scared. He arrived at the scene in 15 minutes, at a speed that should have been impossible given Chicago's traffic. When he saw Isabella sitting on the sidewalk, pale and trembling, something inside him broke. From now on, you'll have security, he said, hugging her. I won't let anyone hurt you. Vincent, what's going on? Who would do something like this? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. That night he insisted she sleep at his apartment. Isabella, still shaken by the scare, didn't resist. She was tired of being afraid, tired of not understanding what was happening. It was during dinner that she asked the question that changed everything. Vincent, tell me about your mother. He stopped eating mid-motion. Why do you want to know about her? Because I have a feeling there's a lot about your family that you haven't told me, and now that I'm carrying a child who will have the Calder name, I think I have the right to know. Vincent put his fork down and looked at her for a long moment. My mother was complicated, he said finally. Complicated how? She had mood problems. What today would be diagnosed as bipolar disorder. But back then in the 80s, people didn't understand much about it. Isabella waited for him to continue. She had episodes, times when she would be euphoric, spend money we didn't have, make grandiose plans, and then times when she would be so depressed she wouldn't get out of bed for weeks. And your father? My father didn't know how to handle it. He is a very rigid man. He saw her illness as a weakness, as something that brought shame to the family. There was a deep pain in Vincent's voice that made Isabella get up from her chair and move closer to him. What happened to her? When I was 8, she had a very severe episode. She spent all the family's bill money in a single afternoon, buying gifts for orphan children. She said she was going to save all the abandoned children in the world. Isabella felt a chill. And then? My father had her committed to a psychiatric clinic in Rome where she had distant relatives. He said it was for her own good and the good of the family. And you never saw her again? Never again. My father said she was better off without us, that our presence only made her more confused, that it was better to let her start over alone. Isabella felt tears in her eyes. Vincent, you were a child. You should have had the right to see her. My father said it was for my protection, that witnessing her episodes would traumatize me more than her absence. But you miss her. Every day, he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. Isabella knelt beside his chair and took his hands. What if she's okay? What if she's alive and well in Rome? Vincent looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and terror. Why are you asking that? Because maybe whoever is sending the letters knows something about her. Maybe this is all connected to your family in some way. It was at that moment that Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the screen and turned pale. Who is it? Isabella asked. My private investigator, he said, answering. Hello? Isabella watched Vincent's face change during the conversation. Surprise first, then confusion, then something that looked like terror. Are you sure? He asked. When was this confirmed? A pause. No, don't tell anyone yet. I'll handle this personally. When he hung up, he stood still for a long moment, staring at the phone. What is it? Isabella asked. My mother, he said, his voice hoarse. She's alive, and her name isn't Elena Calder anymore. What do you mean? After she was committed, she took another name, Elena Marcelli, and she's been living in Rome all these years. Isabella's heart raced. That's good news, isn't it? It should be. But there's a problem. What problem? Vincent looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Pure fear. She knows about you. She knows about the pregnancy. And according to my investigator, she's coming to the States. The silence that followed was deafening. How could she know? Isabella asked finally. I don't know, but the investigator said she's been in contact with people here, people who know our family. Do you think she's the one who sent the letter? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Isabella stood up, nervous. Vincent, what if she still has problems? What if she comes here and... I won't let anything happen to you, he said, standing up as well and hugging her. I promise. But there was something in the way he held her almost desperately that made her realize he was just as scared as she was. That night, they slept in the same bed for the second time since they had conceived the baby, but this time it wasn't about an agreement or desire. It was about fear, and about a mutual need for protection that neither of them knew how to name. Isabella lay her head on Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling their child move gently in her womb. And she realized that somehow they had become a real family, not for the right reasons perhaps, not in the way she had always dreamed, but a family nonetheless. And families protect each other, no matter the cost. Vincent, she whispered in the dark. Whatever happens, I won't let anyone hurt our child. He tightened his embrace. Neither will I, he said. Neither will I. But they both knew it might not be that simple, because when the past comes back to haunt the present, when family becomes synonymous with complication, when love and protection get confused with possessiveness and fear, nothing is guaranteed, and they were about to find out that some wounds are too deep to heal, and some people are willing to do anything to reopen them. Elena Marcelli's arrival in the United States took place on a rainy Tuesday in May. When Isabella was 7 months pregnant, Vincent had hired a security team to accompany her wherever she went, and she felt like a gilded prisoner, protected but without freedom. She found out about the arrival of Vincent's mother by accident. She was resting in his apartment because he had insisted it was safer for her to stay there when she overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. Has she arrived yet? She heard Vincent's tense voice coming from his office. And where is she staying? A pause. No. I don't want her to know where I live or to know about Isabella. Another longer pause. Because she'll try to ruin everything. That's what she's always done. She shows up out of nowhere and destroys anything good I'm building. Isabella moved closer to the door, her heart pounding. I don't care if she's medicated now. I don't care if the doctors say she's stable. I know her, and I know she didn't come here to make peace. When Vincent came out of the office 20 minutes later, he found Isabella sitting on the sofa, waiting for him. Your mother is here, she said without preamble. Vincent stopped in the doorway. You heard the conversation. I did, and I want to know why you don't want her to know about me. Vincent sighed and moved closer, but Isabella noticed he avoided looking directly at her. It's complicated. It's getting more complicated. She'll try to convince me that you're with me for the money. She'll try to plant doubts in my mind about your intentions. Isabella felt as if she'd been slapped. And you'd believe her? It's not that. It's exactly that. You're afraid she might be right. Vincent finally looked at her, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that made her even angrier. Isabella, you don't understand what she's like. My mother has a special talent for finding people's weaknesses and using them against them. And what would my weakness be? Your need to belong, your lack of family. She'll use that to make you question everything we have. Everything we have? Isabella stood up, anger rising inside her. "Vincent, we have an agreement, a contract. You made sure to make that clear from the beginning. You know it's more than that." "Do I? Because from my perspective, it seems like you want all the benefits of having a girlfriend with none of the responsibilities. You want to control me, protect me, decide for me, but when it's convenient, you go back to saying it's just an agreement." Vincent stepped toward her, but Isabella backed away. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" "Because I'm confused. Am I your business partner, or am I someone important to you? Because you can't have it both ways." Before Vincent could answer, the apartment's intercom buzzed. They looked at each other, both knowing it could be anyone, but fearing it was exactly who they were expecting. Vincent went to the intercom and answered, "Vincent, my love, it's me, your mother." The voice that came through the speaker was soft, delicate, with a slight Italian accent, not threatening at all. Nothing that justified the terror Isabella saw spread across Vincent's face. He stood there, not responding, for so long that Elena spoke again. "I know you're there, my son. May I come up? We have much to discuss." Vincent looked at Isabella with an expression that mixed panic and resignation. "Go to the bedroom," he whispered. "Please." "No." "Isabella, I'm not going to hide in the place where I'm living. If she's your mother, if she came all this way, I want to meet her. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. But I'm not going to hide." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, then pressed the button on the intercom. "Come up." In the 5 minutes it took for Eleanor to get to the top floor, Vincent paced the living room like a caged animal. Isabella had never seen him so nervous. When the doorbell rang, he took a deep breath and went to open the door. Elena Marcelli was a small, elegant woman with grey hair pulled back in a flawless bun. She wore a blue silk blouse and a black pencil skirt, an outfit that must have cost more than Isabella earned in 6 months. She looked to be in her 60s, but with well-cared-for skin and a proud posture that suggested someone who valued herself. "My son," she said, approaching Vincent with her arms open. Vincent allowed himself to be hugged, but Isabella noticed he was tense throughout the embrace. "Let me look at you," Eleanor said, holding his face in her hands. "You're so handsome, so important." It was then that she noticed Isabella standing in the living room. "And this must be the famous Isabella," Eleanor said, and there was something in her tone that sent a shiver down Isabella's spine. "Mother," Vincent began. "Oh, my dear, you don't need to explain a thing." Eleanor approached Isabella with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know exactly who you are." "You do?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course. You're the cleaning lady who managed to get pregnant by my son. Very clever." The silence that followed was sharp. Vincent closed his eyes as if he wanted to disappear. "Mother," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's not like that." "No. Then what is it like, my love?" Elena turned to him with an expression of false innocence. "Did you fall madly in love with a cleaning woman and decide to start a family?" "How romantic." Isabella felt her blood boil. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know anything about me or what happened between me and your son." "Oh, but I do, darling." Elena sat on the sofa with a studied elegance. "I know you're an orphan. I know you have no family, no money, no prospects, and I know my son has a savior complex that leads him to collect needy women." "Elena," Vincent said, his voice now holding a warning tone. "What? Am I lying?" Elena looked at him with an expression of false surprise. "Weren't you the one who told me about the French violinist who lost her baby and needed comforting? And the Argentinian model who didn't have money to go home? And the—" "Enough. And now this one. The poor little orphan who always dreamed of being a mother and saw the perfect opportunity in you." Isabella felt tears burn in her eyes, but she refused to give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "You're right about one thing," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I have always wanted to be a mother, and yes, I saw an opportunity in your son, but he also saw what he wanted in me. We were both honest about our intentions. "Oh, were you?" Eleanor laughed, an artificial, cruel sound. "And what were his intentions, dear?" Isabella looked at Vincent, waiting for him to say something, to defend her, to defend their relationship, to show his mother that she was wrong. But Vincent remained silent. "Vincent," Elena said, "are you going to tell her, or would you prefer I do?" "Eleanor, stop." "Tell me what?" Isabella asked, a cold feeling spreading in her stomach. Eleanor smiled. "Tell her that you're not the first woman he's made this arrangement with, darling. Tell her that 2 years ago he tried the same thing with a nurse, paid her to get pregnant, took care of all the medical expenses, and when she was 6 months pregnant, Mother, don't do this. He decided she was getting too attached, that it was getting complicated. So he paid her to have an abortion and never saw her again." Isabella's world fell apart. She looked at Vincent, searching for any sign that Elena was lying, but his expression told her everything she needed to know. It was true. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent couldn't look her in the eye. "Isabella, I can explain." She didn't wait for the explanation. She turned and started walking toward the bedroom, where she had left her things. "Where are you going?" Vincent asked, following her. "Away." "You can't leave. Not now. Not with 2 months until the baby is born." Isabella turned to face him, and Vincent flinched at the fury in her eyes. "Oh, I can't. And why not? Because I'm your property now. Because I'm carrying a Calder and that gives me obligations." "It's not that." "Then what is it? Tell me, Vincent. Explain to me what kind of man makes deals to have children with different women and then gets rid of them when it gets complicated. It wasn't like that with her. With Laura, it was different." "Laura?" Isabella stopped packing her bag. "You remember her name?" "Isabella?" "Tell me about Laura, Vincent. Tell me how it was different with her." Vincent sat on the edge of the bed, his face in his hands. "Laura was a nurse at the hospital where my father died. She was very kind to me during that time. And after the funeral, I was alone, I was grieving. And you made a deal." "Yes, just like we did." "And what happened?" Vincent took a long time to answer. She started talking about marriage, about being a real family, about love. "And that scared you?" "Yes, because that wasn't what we had agreed on." Isabella felt a pain in her chest that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. "And now? Am I talking about love? Am I complicating things?" Vincent looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that confused her even more. "You are," he said quietly. "How am I?" "Because you make me want things I swore I would never want again. You make me think about having a real family, about trusting someone, and that terrifies me." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, but it came too late. "And that's why you never told me about Laura?" "Because I knew. You would think I would do the same thing to you. And you wouldn't?" Vincent didn't answer immediately, and that silence was the answer Isabella needed. "I don't know," he said finally. "I hope not. But I don't know." Isabella finished packing her bag in silence. As she was leaving the room, Vincent grabbed her arm. "Don't go," he said. "Please. Give me one reason to stay that isn't about the baby." He tried to find the words, but they wouldn't come, and Isabella realized that maybe they didn't exist. "That's what I thought," she said. As she passed through the living room, Eleanor was still sitting on the sofa, watching everything with a satisfied expression. "Wise decision, dear," she said. "Men like my son never change. They collect needy women because it makes them feel important. But when those women become real, become complicated, they always choose loneliness." Isabella stopped at the door and looked at Elena. "You're right about one thing," she said. "I always wanted to belong to a family, but now I understand that some families are so toxic that it's better to be alone." She left the apartment and took the elevator down, her hands shaking, her heart broken. When she reached the ground floor, she called a cab and asked to be taken to the bus station. She had a distant cousin in a small town in the countryside, someone she had met in one of the foster homes of her childhood. They hadn't spoken in years, but it was the only place she could think of to go. In the cab, she placed a hand on her belly and felt the baby move. "It's going to be okay," she whispered. "You might not have a father around, but you'll have a mother who truly loves you, and sometimes that's enough." But even as she said it, a part of her hoped that Vincent would come after her, hoped that he would realize he had made a mistake, that she and the baby were more important than his fears. Vincent only found out she was gone 2 hours later when he went back to the bedroom and found a letter on the bed. "Vincent, I understand now that you'll never be able to completely trust anyone, and I understand that for you, love will always mean vulnerability, and vulnerability will always mean danger. I won't try to change that. Our child will be born loved by at least one person in this world, and that will have to be enough. Don't look for me, Isabella." Along with the letter, she had left an ultrasound photo and a small card on which she had written, "If you ever want to meet your child, you'll know where to find us." Vincent read the letter 3 times before running out of the apartment, leaving Elena alone in the living room, a victorious smile on her lips. But when he got to the bus station, the bus to the countryside had already left, and Isabella had disappeared from his life, taking with her the only chance he might have had to understand what it truly meant to love someone. The town of Maple Creek, Wisconsin, was a 2-hour bus ride from Chicago, but to Isabella it felt like it was on the other side of the world. It was a small place where everyone knew each other, where houses had gardens and people still greeted each other on the street. It was a world away from the life she had left behind. Carmen, her distant cousin, welcomed her without asking questions. She was a 50-year-old widow who ran a small inn in the center of town. When Isabella showed up on her doorstep, 8 months pregnant, and with her eyes red from crying, Carmen simply opened her arms and said, "Come in, honey. Let's have some tea." Isabella told her only the essentials, that she was pregnant, that the baby's father was a complicated man she needed to get away from, and that she had nowhere else to go. Carmen didn't press. There was a quiet wisdom in the woman that came from years of caring for people, who arrived at her inn carrying their own stories. "You can stay as long as you need," Carmen said, "but in return you'll help me with the inn. Nothing too strenuous, of course, considering your condition." For the first few days, Isabella barely left her room. She spent hours lying down, her hands on her belly, thinking about Vincent. She tried to hate him for the lie about Laura, for the way he had let his mother destroy the little trust that existed between them. But she couldn't. What hurt her most wasn't even the discovery about Laura. It was the fact that Vincent hadn't been able to fight for her. When Elena planted the seeds of doubt, when she questioned Isabella's motives, he didn't defend her. He remained silent, doubting her just as he had doubted every other woman in his life. A week after arriving in town, Isabella started helping Carmen at the inn's front desk. It was quiet work, checking in a few tourists who came for the mountain region, managing reservations, helping with the rooms. Slowly, she got to know the people of the town. The local priest, Father Michael, a young man with the demeanor of an older brother. Mrs. Rose, who owned a bakery next to the inn and made the best bread Isabella had ever tasted. Mr. George, the town's taxi driver, who knew the history of every family in Maple Creek. It was Mrs. Rose who first noticed that Isabella was close to her due date. "That belly has dropped, girl," she said one morning, as Isabella was buying bread for the inn's breakfast. "It won't be long now." It was true. For a few days, Isabella had felt the baby in a different position, heavier, lower. There was also that strange feeling that something was preparing itself inside her, as if her body were organizing for the most important moment of her life. On the night of September 20th, the contractions began. Isabella was helping Carmen close up the front desk when she felt the first one. It was different from the minor discomforts she had been feeling for weeks. It was strong, defined, impossible to ignore. "Carmen," she said, leaning on the counter, "I think it's time." Carmen dropped everything and called Dr. Sanders, the only obstetrician in town, a kind man who had been seeing Isabella for the past few weeks. "He's coming to get you," Carmen said, grabbing the bag they had packed weeks before. "Everything's going to be fine, honey." The labor was long but uncomplicated. Dr. Sanders and the nurse, Sister Lucy, cared for Isabella, with a gentleness she had never experienced. There was no rush, no rigid protocols. It was a humanized environment where she felt respected and cared for. At 6 in the morning on September 21st, after 14 hours of labor, Lawrence Calder Smith came into the world. When Dr. Sanders placed the baby in her arms for the first time, Isabella understood that everything she had been through, all the loneliness, all the pain, all the confusion, had been worth it to get to this moment. Lawrence was small but perfectly formed. He had his father's dark hair and large dark eyes that Isabella was sure would be just like hers. When he opened his eyes for the first time and looked directly at her, Isabella felt a connection so deep it almost took her breath away. "Hi, my love," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mommy." In the following days, Carmen cared for Isabella and Lawrence as if they were her own family. The house was filled with neighbors bringing food, gifts, and offering help. It was the kind of welcome Isabella had never experienced, a true community where people cared for one another without expecting anything in return. Father Michael was one of the first to visit. He was a man in his 40s with graying hair and a gentle smile who had become a friend to Isabella during her weeks in town. "He's beautiful," the priest said, watching Lawrence sleep in her arms. "And he's lucky. He'll be raised by a mother who loves him unconditionally." "Father Michael," Isabella said hesitantly, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you think a person can be happy alone? I mean, can a single mother provide everything a child needs?" The priest smiled. "Isabella, love isn't about the number of people. It's about the quality of affection. This boy will be raised by someone who chose him before he was even born, who fought to have him, who gave up so much to protect him. That's more than many children with conventional families receive." But despite all the reassuring words, despite the love she felt for Lawrence, despite the community's embrace, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about Vincent. Especially in the early hours of the morning, while breastfeeding Lawrence in silence, she would find herself imagining what it would be like if Vincent were there. What it would be like if he had been able to fight for what they had, if he had been able to trust her. Did he know the baby had been born? Did he care? Did he sometimes think of them? Or had he managed to move on as if nothing had happened? Meanwhile, in Chicago, Vincent was going out of his mind. He had hired private investigators to find Isabella, but she seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. She wasn't using credit cards, didn't have a cell phone in her own name, and hadn't registered the baby in any hospital in the metropolitan area. Elena had returned to Rome 2 weeks after Isabella's departure, satisfied with the damage she had caused. Before leaving, she told Vincent she had done it for his own good. "You'll thank me one day," she had said. "That woman would have ruined your life, just like all the others." But Vincent didn't feel grateful. He felt empty, lost. For the first time in his adult life, he understood what it meant to truly love someone, and he also understood what it meant to lose that person because of his own fears. He had discovered things about himself in the weeks after Isabella left. He discovered he could no longer play the piano because every song reminded him of her. He discovered that his cold, minimalist apartment had become unbearable because every corner held memories of the moments they had spent together. He discovered that work had completely lost its meaning because he realized that everything he had achieved professionally meant nothing if he had no one to share it with. And he discovered, above all, that he had been a coward for not telling her about Laura from the beginning, a coward for letting his mother plant doubts about Isabella without defending her, a coward for not going after her immediately, but most of all a coward for letting his fear of being abandoned cause him to sabotage the only real and good thing that had ever happened in his life. The discovery of Isabella's whereabouts happened by chance. Vincent was in his office one afternoon, in October, when his secretary came in to deliver some documents. Among them was a piece of mail that had arrived for him, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Isabella, sitting in a rocking chair, breastfeeding a small, perfect baby. On the back of the photo, a single line written in her delicate handwriting, "Lawrence Calder Smith, born September 21st. Vincent stared at the photo for 20 minutes, unable to move. His son. He had a son, and Isabella had given him the Calder name, even after everything that had happened. Below the signature, an address. The Valley Inn, Maple Creek, Wisconsin. Vincent canceled all his appointments and left Chicago that same afternoon. The drive to Maple Creek was the longest of his life. 2 hours that felt like an eternity as he mentally rehearsed what he would say, how he would apologize, how he would convince her that he had changed. When he arrived in town, it was already dark. The Valley Inn was on a quiet street downtown, an old house tastefully and lovingly converted. Vincent parked across the street and watched the lit windows for a few minutes, trying to work up the courage. That's when he heard the music. It was coming from the church next to the inn, a small colonial church with its doors open. Someone was singing inside, a soft female voice, a melody he didn't recognize but that touched him deeply. Vincent approached and looked through the open door. Isabella was sitting in one of the front pews, Lawrence in her arms, singing softly to him. It was a simple, sweet English lullaby, and there was something so pure about the scene that Vincent felt tears burn in his eyes. She was thinner than the last time he had seen her, but there was a serenity on her face he had never seen before. She looked at peace, complete. Vincent entered the church slowly, trying not to make a sound. But as he got closer, Isabella sensed him and stopped singing. She turned and saw him standing there, his eyes red, and an expression of such deep regret that for a moment she almost stood up and ran to him. But she didn't move. "Hi," she said softly, so as not to wake the baby. "Hi," Vincent replied, his voice hoarse. They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. Vincent seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 months. There was a sadness in his eyes that Isabella had never seen before. "He's beautiful," Vincent said, looking at the baby in her arms. "He is," Isabella agreed. Do you want to meet him?" Vincent nodded, not trusting his own voice. Isabella stood up slowly and approached him, holding Lawrence out so he could see him better. The baby was sleeping, his tiny fists clenched, his breathing soft and regular. When Vincent looked at him up close, he saw his own features mixed with Isabella's, and he felt an emotion so strong he had to lean on the pew for support. Can I hold him?" Isabella hesitated for a moment, then carefully placed Lawrence in his father's arms. Vincent held his son for the first time and felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. There was something primal and overwhelming in holding this tiny being who was a part of him, who existed because of him. Suddenly, he understood that nothing else in his life mattered as much as protecting this child. "He has your eyes," Isabella said, watching Vincent's reaction. "And your nose," Vincent said, gently touching the baby's face. "And your mouth." They stood there in silence, the three of them, in the empty church. It was the first time they were together as a family, but there was a distance between Isabella and Vincent that hadn't been there before. "Isabella," Vincent said finally, "I need to ask for your forgiveness." "Vincent, no, let me speak, please." He looked at her with an intensity that made her sit back down on the pew. "I was wrong about everything from the very beginning. Weren't you wrong not to trust me? I was wrong not to trust myself. I was wrong to let my fear of being abandoned make me abandon you first." Isabella felt tears well up in her eyes. "And Laura, were you wrong not to tell me about her?" "I was, because I knew if you found out, you would understand that I didn't know how to truly love, that I collected women like trophies, as proof that I could get anything I wanted. And now, do you know how to truly love?" Vincent looked at Lawrence, then at her. "I don't know. But I want to learn, with you, with him. Vincent, I can't be an experiment for you anymore. I can't be someone you test to see if you can trust. That's not what I'm asking." "Then what are you asking?" Vincent took a deep breath and did something he had never done in his life. He knelt. There in the church, holding his son in his arms, he knelt before Isabella. "I'm asking for a chance to start over, for real this time. No arrangements, no contracts, no shields." "What do you mean?" "I'm asking you to teach me how to be a father, to teach me how to be a partner. to give me the chance to build a real family with you." Isabella looked at him, the most powerful man she knew, kneeling in a small-town church with his son in his arms, begging for a second chance. "What if it goes wrong again? What if your fears come back? What if you decide it's too complicated? Then you'll leave, and you'll take Lawrence, and I will respect that. But Isabella, I'm not going to run away anymore. I'm not going to sabotage this anymore. I'm not going to let the past decide my future." "How can I know that's true?" Vincent placed Lawrence back in her arms and took her hands. "Because I'm here. Because I came after you. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to fight for someone instead of running away." Isabella looked at him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, but she also saw the fragility. Vincent was a wounded man trying to heal, and she didn't know if she had the strength to be part of that healing process. "I need time," she said finally. "How much time?" I don't know, maybe a lot, maybe a little, but I need to see if you've really changed or if this is just the desperation of having lost something." Vincent nodded. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." "And where will you stay?" Vincent smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Well, I hear there's a nice inn in town." In the months that followed, Vincent proved he was serious. He rented a small apartment in Maple Creek and began working remotely. Every day he spent a few hours with Lawrence, learning to change diapers, give him a bottle, rock him to sleep. He didn't pressure Isabella for anything more than letting him be a father. He didn't talk about a relationship, didn't try to force intimacy, didn't make romantic promises. He was simply present, consistently present. And slowly, Isabella began to see real changes in him. Vincent was learning to be vulnerable without feeling threatened. He was learning to care for someone without trying to control them. He was learning that love wasn't possession, it was freedom. The first time Isabella allowed herself to trust him again was on a December morning when she found Vincent asleep in the rocking chair with Lawrence in his arms. The baby had woken up during the night, and Vincent had insisted that Isabella rest while he took care of their son. Seeing him there, disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, completely given over to that moment of fatherhood, made something inside her let go. Maybe it was possible, maybe they could, in fact, build something real together. On the eve of Lawrence's first birthday, Vincent asked the question they both knew was coming eventually. "Isabella, will you marry me?" They were in the church, the place had become special to them, and Lawrence was playing on the floor with some toys. "Vincent, before you answer, let me tell you something. I'm not asking because it's what society expects. I'm not asking because Lawrence needs married parents. I'm asking because I love you, truly, just the way you are, with all your strength, all your independence, all your ability to teach me how to be a better person." Isabella smiled. "And what if I say no? I'll be sad, but I'll still be here. I'll still be Lawrence's father, and I'll keep trying to deserve you every day. And if I say yes, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this second chance." Isabella looked at Lawrence, who had toddled over and was tugging at the hem of her dress. "What do you think, my love?" she asked her son. "Does Daddy deserve a second chance?" Lawrence smiled, that toothless grin that melted hearts, and babbled something that sounded vaguely like "Dada." "I think we have our answer," Isabella said, extending her hand to Vincent. They were married 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the same church where they had been reunited. Carmen was Isabella's maid of honor, and Father Michael officiated. Lawrence, now a year and a half old, was the cutest ring-bearer Maple Creek had ever seen. Elena was not invited to the wedding. Vincent had learned that some toxic people need to stay in the past for a future to be possible. During the exchange of vows, Vincent said something that made Isabella cry with emotion. "Isabella, you taught me that love isn't about being afraid of losing someone. It's about having the courage to give your heart completely, knowing the risk is worth taking. I promise to love you with that courage every day of my life." And Isabella replied, "Vincent, you taught me that it's possible to be strong and vulnerable at the same time, that it's possible to build a family based on choice, not just on blood, and that sometimes the right people come into our lives in the most unexpected ways." 3 years later, Vincent and Isabella still live in Maple Creek. He expanded his business to the region, creating jobs and investing in the community that had welcomed them. Isabella went back to school and earned a degree in education, now working as a teacher at the local school. Lawrence grew up in an atmosphere of true love, surrounded by a community that considers him everyone's child, and there are rumors that he'll soon have a little brother or sister. Sometimes on stormy nights, Vincent still plays the piano for his family. But now the melodies are cheerful, full of hope. Music that celebrates the present, instead of lamenting the past. And Isabella finally understood that belonging to someone doesn't mean losing your freedom. It means choosing every day to build something beautiful together with the one you love. Because in the end, the best love stories aren't about perfect people who meet at the right time. They're about wounded people who choose to heal together, building something stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have achieved alone. And little Lawrence, whenever someone asks about his parents, proudly replies, "My daddy learned how to love from my mommy, and my mommy learned how to trust from my daddy. And I learned that family is this, people who choose to grow together." Thus ends the story of Isabella and Vincent, not with a perfect ending, but with a new beginning. A beginning built on solid foundations, respect, trust, and the courage to choose love every single day. Because after all, the best gifts in life don't come wrapped in gold paper. They come wrapped in second chances, in the courage to change, and in the decision that true love is worth any risk.